All righty, Cole, thank you very much. Okay, slide number one. My backyard, I've turned it into a community composting site, trying to get people engaged in it. So let's see here. So Cole asked me to talk about, or to share my contact information. Then I'll do the inspiration behind my Grace Valley composting, and then the elements that are in my factory, the inputs that I get and the outputs and the steps in the process, and then my concept of the V over T ratio. So if anybody wants to see me on Facebook, they could just look me up under that name. That'd be great. Friend me. Email pilepro@sbcglobal.net. If anybody wants to call or text. And the only reason I put my mailing address, I live on Grace Drive and the road behind me is Spring Valley, so I decided to call my place Grace Valley. So the inspiration for Grace Valley community composting, 20 something years ago, I invented a bin, and I called it the Pile Pro, and sold hundreds of them between 98 and 08. I quit because two reasons. Mainly, I became dissatisfied with the design. I showed a photo of it in the last show, but it's just a welded wire bin, very low tech. But anyway, I was not happy with the design. Nobody ever complained about it, and then the shipping costs at that time were becoming really expensive. But back when I came up with the bin, after I learned all I could about composting, read all the books I could, went to demonstration sites, and somehow I got this image in my mind, or not such an image, an idea that I could make the backyard factory. And then I guess the word pro popped in, and pile, so Pile Pro kind of was the inspiration, or that, the factory inspired the Pile Pro name. And so let's see, okay, yeah, my mouse here. So that was a vision. I mean, not even a vision, it was just an idea. I had no idea what the factory was going to look like, not at all. The only vision that I had, I wanted some kind of an equilibrium where I was going to have a bunch of piles and build one and harvest one during the same time period. So, I mean, ultimately you'd have 365 piles. Each one would be sitting there for a year, and you would harvest one and build one on a daily basis for each person. So my factory elements, I have the factory divided into workstations. So I have what I call a receiver bin bay, or it can be either a bin or a bay. And then after that, I load my buckets. I have a bucket loading station, and I have photographs of each of these. And then the wetting station is what Cole was talking about, which people were interested in last time. And then after the wetting station, we go to a declumping tub, or actually, instead of declumping, I should have changed that to fluffing. Fluffing is a better word than declumping. And then from there, we go into the composting bins, and I have 16 of them. And the reason is 16, I want a 4-month composting period if I go out there and work once a week. So every week I go out, I harvest a bin or harvest a pile and make a new one. So, in addition, so after the bins, I have curing racks. This is something relatively new, but after the stuff comes out of the bins, it gets fluffed up and then goes into the curing racks. So I have two stations. And then after that, my sifter, which is, some people say sifting is optional. I can only say that the people that say that have never used a good sifter, because to me, it's just kind of indispensable. Okay, so stop number one, this is the I call it the bin bay. And I made this out of 2 crummy composting bins. Okay, one, I don't know if anybody can see the CE Shepherd bin. It's a metal frame. Okay, and doesn't really show up too well, but the CE Shepherd bin, it's made in Houston and really popular here in Texas. But it's I don't know, I call it really a rabbit pen. And I was looking over my presentation from 2 years ago, and I did discuss what some people call composting bins. I just call them rabbit cages because that's really all they are. There's nothing special about them. And so that's the metal frame that you can't really see all that well. But what you can also see are pieces from the Geo bin. I don't know if anybody knows, and I guess let's hold off the comments until the end. Then we'll just go back and revisit anything that anybody wants to talk about. But the Geo bin, another really kind of crummy bin. It's a cylinder made from a rectangle. The material itself is fantastic, indestructible, going to last a lifetime. But as a composting structure, it's really I don't like it at all. But it can be accessorized and made into something quite a bit better than what those people up there at GeoBin would have you do. But unfortunately, those people don't use their own product for composting, which is pretty common. I don't think there's a single bin manufacturer out there that uses their own product in order to demonstrate how good it really is not. Oh, but okay, so, but I wanted to show you, see how, whoops, sorry. So the bin bay, so the panels, this was by accident. I discovered that this bin was more useful if I could convert it into a bay. And I'm only showing you one bag of leaves loaded in there, but as some of the bags are really heavy, and to be able to lower that top, lower the front hatch, and I can completely remove it also, so it does become a bay. So that can help in getting that thing fully loaded. And sorry, I just put this together in a hurry, so it's and as Cole and I talked about, this could easily go into something several hours long. So the bucket stuffing station. So what you see here is it's kind of picture like 2 funnels combined. So we have a plastic container, a 30-gallon container with 2 holes cut in the bottom. And I have what I call centering collars attached to each hole with these 90-degree brackets. Now, this is an old design. The new one's considerably simpler. But basically, what you have under here are the 2 buckets that are to be loaded. And then I can dump a big bag of leaves or a bunch of leaves in there and stuff them through the holes into the buckets. And so here you see the bucket loader with the leaves in there. See the buckets on the bottom. And I push the leaves down through the 2 openings. And when I take the bucket loader away, there are my metal tanks, and they're up on bricks because at the bottom of the tanks are plumbing fittings, and you'll see that in the next slide. So my initial years and years ago, I decided that wetting compost in a bin with a hose and mixing with the fork, not only is it's a 3-person job, really. You got somebody loading the stuff in the bin and somebody manning the hose and then somebody else manning the fork to do the mixing. And by the time you're all done, not only do you have you got a big mess, a big puddle around you, but very inadequately wetted material. And so I came up with the what I call the ideal watering system. Now, my original system was a small bucket stuffed full of leaves. And with a bunch of holes in the bottom of the bucket, and I set it inside a bigger reservoir tank. And I would just immerse it in there and let it sit for a minute or two, a couple of minutes, until all of the air bubbles were gone. So I knew everything in there was uniformly moist. Okay, so the ideal watering system. You try that. You could never do that with a hose and a fork. And if you did, you're wasting a lot of water, you're making a lot of mud, and it's taking a lot of time. So then I realized at some point, well, I could get rid of the big tank if I just filled up the bucket with the water and had a way to drain the liquid out when I wanted to. And so what you see here, this is an older system, a two-tier system, and the tanks are manifolded together with plumbing fittings. Okay, and so after everything is stuffed, now on top of the tank, on top of each set of leaves in there, I have some kind of a weight. I use a 10-inch potting saucer. Okay, there you can see the 10-inch clay terracotta saucer to weigh down the material, or else it'll try and float. And the reason for the manifolding, I wanted to just be able to fill one tank up and just mess with one tank at a time. In fact, what I wanted to do was have a garden hose do the filling. So it just would start filling here and daisy chain into all of the tanks. And that's someday I'll get to that. But right now it's easier to just manually fill everything. The reason for the two tiers is because I would let the fill the top row of buckets and let it sit for however long I wanted to. Now, in the beginning, it was a day. I decided overnight would be good enough. And then open up a valve and just let it drain into the lower set of buckets. And so that was kind of nice. So it took some time to fill the top manually, but to do the bottom, I just opened up the valve over here and let it fill on its own. Of course, I'd have to come and top these off, but still, a lot of time saved. So this, I decided to get rid of the lower tier of buckets. And so now I have 8 buckets, all suspended by chains. Just the way I chose to do it. There's any number of ways you could do something like this. A buddy of mine's very critical, says I spent way too much money on plumbing and yada yada, but not really an issue here. Now this was I wanted to have a central reservoir tank where I could revisit the garden hose idea and have it fill up this one central tank, and that would feed into the left bank and the right bank. And it works okay. It does work okay, but it takes a longer time than I wanted it to. So I'm kind of back to the manual fill of I fill the left bank and then the right bank. What you don't see right now in this photograph are 2 30-gallon trash containers that I can drain the water into so I can reuse it if I want. Or if I want to drain it, I can just connect a garden hose to one of the valves and open it up, put the output of the hose wherever in the yard and just let it drain. The background here, this is my forest, my suburban forest. So 10 years ago, that was just turf grass. I moved into the house, it was just turf grass, and all of these trees are volunteers. They've all grown on their own. So, because I don't like lawns, so I smothered everything and I spread my composted stuff about and let the squirrels do their thing. Okay, so now I let the tanks sit for a week. Okay, that's part of my cycle. So they sit for a week, and after a week, they are quite compacted. Oh, okay, so after the tanks are drained, this is a 25-gallon tub. So one bucket at a time, I dump the bucket in there and then fluff it up with this garden fork. And so what that's doing is all of the leaves, which is my primary ingredient. I'm getting to food, but right now it's mostly leaves. Each leaf gets a breath of fresh air. Okay, so we take something that's compacted and expand it, fluff it up, and so everything gets to take a breath of fresh air before it goes into the compost bin. And so these are my compost bins. So I have 16 of these things. These are variants of the Geo bin predecessor. And I have these left over from when I used to sell my Pile Pro bin. These were accessories to it, to the wire fencing. These were liners. And as you can see, I have covered up these holes because I've decided that these holes do nothing except let the exterior of the pile dry out. They're what I call eye candy. The designers just put them in there for, I don't know why they do. They just look nice and people see it and they want to believe that it adds to, aids in aeration when it really doesn't. What you can't see is these piles are lifted up off of the ground, okay? And they vent from the bottom. And there's a guy named Jim McNelly. He tried to popularize this back in the late 70s. If you have the book, the Harmonious Technologies book, it shows his drawing of the compost aeration mat, where he recommends lifting the pile up off the ground to let the air flow in through the bottom, kind of like logs in a fireplace do. Unfortunately, there's not a trace of that book or any of that concept on the internet anywhere. And I have reached out to Jim and found him on Messenger and tried to engage him a little bit, but I don't know, he's just not too chatty, let's just say. He went off and he tried to do something industrial, which is really impressive what he did, but I don't think that's taken off either. Now, as I was kind of disparaging the design of this bin here, one of the enhancements, I use these bicycle rims to make it into a cylinder, because one of my complaints about this, in addition to the holes, is it's difficult to make it into a cylinder. And so using these bicycle rims on the inside, really, it helps you get a nice, beautiful, perfect cylinder. And then the one great thing about the bin, it's lightweight. So when the time comes to do the harvest, you just lift it up right off of the contents. And then this will stay for quite a while. So in fact, before I harvest, I lift the bin off and I do a pre-cure phase where it just, the pile begins to dry out on its own. Okay, so after the bin, it goes, I do a fluffing. I fluff it in the fluffing tub, and then it goes into these curing racks. Okay, so each rack, I fit 1 5-gallon bucket worth of stuff into these curing racks. And now what they are, they're bread trays. I found some of them and I bought some of them. And what I do is I put, you can see I built up the side across the front. And then on these, the left and right sides, they got a bunch of holes in them. So I covered those up. And on the bottom of the tray, I put window screens, so so stuff wouldn't fall through. But that's okay, my curing racks. And so the stuff goes into a set of, I have two of these. I have two stacks of these. And so it goes in fluffed up into one stack and sits for a week. And then I take it out of the curing rack and put it into another curing rack. So it's kind of a fluffing up because the stuff wants to stay wet. It wants to stay moist. I'm sure you're familiar with composted stuff, how it really does a great job of retaining moisture. And so you do have to help it dry out. So that's why I move it from one rack to the next rack. And then it goes into to the sifter station. So this, I'm really happy with this. Okay, this is a mixing tray for drywall or concrete or whatever. I just made this frame out of PVC. Real happy with it. Prior to this, I had the trough sitting on top of a barrel. And so it's kind of, not only is it a bad use of a barrel, I had all this space under here that I couldn't really access. And so I used a hand fork to just mix this stuff up and fluff it. And then I pour it onto the sifter with a 16-inch wide dustpan that I got from Harbor Freight. Beautiful. And I'm not showing you everything about the sifter, but you can see there's a container in the front, there's a container in the back, and there's two chutes. This is the rear chute, and there's the sifting screen is on top of that. And so the rear chute, whoops. The rear chute guides the material, the sifted stuff, the fine stuff, into the rear container. And then the front chute guides it, sorry about that, into the front container. So compared to the old-fashioned, flat screen over the wheelbarrow, this is just so much nicer. And I do have a video that I could share if anybody wants to see that. But the inclined plane sifter, I really like it. Okay, so the inputs I get, generally I get leaves, and I don't know what it's like out there in California, but here in Texas, this is all too common, really a sad sight. And what's even sadder, what's really pretty sad about this particular picture, these paper bags, these people think that they're doing good here because these are destined to the municipal facility. See, this is my city of Richardson. To their credit, they did promote human-powered composting for quite a while. I mean, they really did. They had somebody come in and teach their traditional methods, and not to my surprise, it just never took off. Okay, it just never. So they gave up. And so now we all pay a lot of money for a nice social program. A whole separate fleet of trucks will come by and take your bagged stuff and take it first to a grinding station and then to the municipal facility where it might take, a year, 12 to 14 months. And then if it ever makes it back to where it came from, that's a over 50-mile round trip, kind of a big carbon footprint. But to the city's credit, they did try the human operation first, and it failed. And so now so these are other inputs. These are just plastic bags going to the landfill. I mean, just all over the place here. It's really sad. And but that was part of my motivation for composting. I just can't stand seeing this stuff. It just, ugh. So my outputs, the sifter gets different screens, okay, depending upon how fine I want to screen it. So up here, this is what I call grade A. This is passed through a 1/4-inch screen. Grade B, it didn't go through the 1/4-inch, but it went through the 1/2 inch. And grade C, grade C went through the 1 inch, but not the 1/2 inch. And then grade D over here, it didn't even make it through the 1 inch. So the grade D is really kind of not really defined. It's got no upper limit on the size. So I'm probably going to stop talking about grade D. But anyway, this is, to me, it's got to go through, it's got to be sifted just so I can have some kind of a uniform product. And so instead of when people say, well, how do you know when the compost is finished? Well, it looks like it's, it smells earthy and you can't tell what it used to be and blah, blah, blah. So to me, it went through my bin, it got ideally watered, which is so much better than the wrung out sponge. I can't relate to that, the wrung out sponge analogy. All the surfaces need to be wet. And in letting it sit for, a week, the leaves come out waterlogged. Okay. They're really turning black by the time they, from a light brown to a black, because they have absorbed a lot of water. So kind of like for the microorganisms and bacteria, to them, it's kind of like having some water or beer or what have you to wash down pizza. A lot more, you can eat a lot more pizza when you get something to wash it down with. And same thing with those microorganisms. So my weekly, okay, so this is kind of cutting edge here. Like literally, I'm just doing this on the fly. I'm making some of these measurements here because I want to start timing how long these steps take me. Okay, so when I go out to the factory, step number 1, drain the tank. So I open up open up the valves and drain them into the holding barrels. And let's just say that takes about 2 minutes. Then I go over to curing rack 2. Okay, and that stuff has been through, it's composted for 4 months, it's cured for 2 weeks. So it gets fluffed and it goes to the sifter. And then from the sifter, it goes into containers to where it's going to leave the premises and go feed the earth somewhere. I haven't measured that time yet. I haven't gotten that. So that's TBD. So then the next step is the curing, the curing rack 1 stuff goes now over to curing rack 2, the empty curing rack. So that took me about 15 minutes to do. A little bit longer than it should, because as I was going through the process, I discovered a faster way to do it. So that next time around, that 15 is going to drop by a few minutes. So let's see. So now then the next step is I've got my compost bin, the unshrouded one that's been sitting there doing the pre-cure that you saw in the photograph. So that stuff goes into the fluffing tub that you saw, and it gets divided up into eighths and goes into the empty curing rack number 1. Okay, and now my tanks up here that I just drained, I go back to them. Each tank goes into the fluffing tub and it makes a new compost pile. And so that took me 17 minutes. Sorry, it's okay, 8 minutes for this step, 17 minutes. And now I have empty tanks. Okay, I got 8 empty tanks. And so I go over to the receiver bin and I stuff the tanks at the stuffing station and carry them over to the wetting station, which took me 14 minutes. And then a pail at a time, I took the water, liquid, what have you, from the barrels into the wetting tanks. And that took me about 15 minutes. So now the V over T ratio. So I came up with that. It's because I want to measure, I want to quantify this process. And so the volume and okay, maybe mass, I think, mass might be better, but the volume of the finished product divided by the time it took the human being to make it, V over T ratio. I don't know, to my knowledge, nobody even ever talks about this. You could use that number to determine how much the compost, the free stuff, really costs at $15 an hour of your time. It's sort of, I'm always a little bit bothered when somebody says it's free. Oh, you should compost because it's free. Well, it's not really free. I mean, you could call it a free byproduct of your hobby, but to say it's free isn't, I think it's a little deceptive. And another thing about, because there's no volume per time, nobody knows which composting equipment is best. And the first time I ever went to a demonstration site, I saw about 15 different bins. And I used to be a competitive athlete. And I think that athlete in me wanted to know, just said that there's got to be, one of these has got to be better than the rest. And when the advice that people tell you, oh, just try out a whole bunch of them and you choose the one that works the best for you, I'm sorry, there's something so wrong with that. It's as if they've never even done it. They don't even have a clue how to advise you. So they're just telling you to figure it out for yourself, which, no, I want the best one. And so I would like to see composting have a world championship, okay, where this V over T is maximized. Now, of course, we need some standards. What is the definition of a finished product? For example, you can't have it, well, it looks crumbly and it smells earthy and it doesn't resemble what it used to be. Now, we got to do better than that. But I do believe you got to make a contest and prize money and fame, and let's figure out who makes the best composting bin once and for all out of all of those. When you go to, say, Gardener Supply and you see 50 different bins, that's 50 different bins, cages, tumblers, what have you, one of them is better than the rest. And I think a lot of people take up composting and just quit out of sheer frustration. Because not only is it a lot of work, a lot of it is drudge work, the turning. I didn't say anything. I don't turn my piles. I gave that up. There is a little secret, a little something about my bins that I'm not really sharing. I can share that later. They are kind of special, that allows them to not need to be turned. But anyway, that's it. How do we do on time here this time?